He so loved these winter nights. The little hatchling wiggled in her arms. Sharp little claws gripped at her skin while tiny horns butted into her chest. Yawning, the girl watched the silver boy nuzzle into the crook of her arm before finally going still with a quiet huff. She couldn't help but smile. It had taken her longer than she cared to admit to learn how to calm him. The new little silver nearly always slept happily among the pile of siblings until he woke fretfully and whimpered a pitiful complaint in the night. In the early days, she cooed and bundled him up and rocked him by the fire. That usually just made things worse, and some nights she fell asleep while the boy still fussed unhappily in her arms. Dagger tried his tricks too and could distract him easily enough, but the next night the tiny boy would wake fussing again. The girl shook her head, feeling, not for the first time, foolish. Outside, in the night air, the cool breeze wrapped a blanket around the boy's silver scales that suited him better than any wool. As long as her arms were bare, covered in goose pimples where the winter's bite nipped at her flesh, the boy would burrow into the cradle of her arms and sleep. As much as she worried at first, the cold never made him sick, and even falling snow never made him stir. If Dagger knew, he would tease her, but some nights like tonight, she couldn't help but prod the little silver belly with a finger until the boy woke and uttered a tiny little shaking yawn. The hatchling's jaws snapped closed like a sleepy cat, and tiny crimson eyes peered up at her from the silver face like fresh drops of blood on the evening snow. Red eyes that should have been frightening to see, like so many creatures from dark Rockland tales. But they weren't. The boy's face blinked sleepily at his sister in the dark, sleepy but still filled with wonder. There were no words the girl had for how sick it made her to watch the wonder and joy slowly drain from Dagger over the years. The playful dark boy she once knew, bit by bit, becoming a shadow. The mischief in his eyes never died, but his laughter grew a little more faded, his smiles a little more wry. There was no stepping back to find the playful black hatchling. There were no roads that wound backwards to a point when she could find the open, silly smiles he lost like a dropped coin in the street. Rockcut smiled always, except when he cried for food. The red-scale boy was always hungry, but if she had to spread her hunting grounds to the darkest corners of the Rocklands, Rockcut would never go truly hungry, or ever truly feel alone. She would not see the smiles fade from his eyes like Dagger. The silly jam-smeared snout and the sticky claws that chased Dagger, laughing through the house, brought his older brother and sister more smiles than they could often find on their own. And then here in her arms, on the still winter nights, another pair of new eyes shone back. To say she loved waking at odd hours to sit in the frigid air outside would be a miserable lie. But the times she lazily rolled back into the pile and tried to ignore him, guilt panged at her stomach, and she eventually gathered the boy in her arms and staggered groggily out into the winter snow. From the cold mountains beyond the city walls, a wolf's cry rose in the night air. A second joined, a third, and then the rest of the pack as one. The sound pulled the girl's eyes skyward towards the rising moon in the night sky that the wild roaming packs always sang to. Pale behind the clouds, like a silver shield cresting the mountains. Blinking sleepily, a tiny fist rose as though to grab it like a giant pearl. A happy bubbling giggle escaped his chest. His sister laughed. "Trying to bring the moon down, ears." An eyebrow raised at the baby boy. So new, but already so strong. Maybe one day you might, eh? Strap it to your arm for a buckler. Maybe melt down the ore, hammer it into a sword, go and slay demons. Clean out the Rocklands. In between, you'll come home, tell us all about it. We'll all tell those stories for the rest of the year. The girl offered him a finger that the little silver scale quickly stuffed in his mouth. Calloused as shoe leather, her fingers were almost immune to the sharp little daggers inside. Still, the little claws that gripped her hand like a vice, and the happy little snarl of his snout made her laugh. He would be strong. The thought filled her chest with a pride she couldn't quite explain. The tiny boy blinked as the moon finally crested the hill and its light began to bother his eyes. The light shone like mist over a frozen lake, like the light that came from the priest's hands when he invoked the king's name over the silver egg, like the light that first filled her eyes when the boy first filled his lungs with air, like the light of God. Gradually, the boy settled in her arms again, sucking on her finger. His sleepy eyes slowly blinked closed. He'd probably cooled off enough to sleep through the night. Another minute or two, and she pushed to her feet to take him back inside. It was probably too soon for proper names, but the girl really didn't care. He could trade it later when his deeds earned another. First names didn't have to mean very much. But for her, there were 2 words in her mind that she would argue with Dagger about in the morning. 2 words that, to her, would always mean that sudden, almost painful moment when she saw the light of God.